This is Powers of Two, some rough notes for a proposed film or book or new media blob or whatever. And it would be based on Powers of Ten by Charles and Ray Eames. And before we go much further, hi. This is Tuna Jeans, and I have just gotten the ability to play a video along with my video. Sorry for the long pause there. And this is the opening scene from a rough sketch for Powers of Ten, or a rough sketch for a proposed film, which then became Powers of Ten. You can watch the actual, I almost want to say final film, but the production film that was funded by IBM and distributed to many schools and universities and basically made available by IBM as a very nice, significant piece of corporate generosity. Although presumably some people thought it would also help the corporation, but I wouldn't consider that a bad thing. So I'm using the rough sketch because it has certain features that were abandoned in the production film, primarily in the dashboard on the left. They tried to take into account relativity. And I think that was a somewhat misguided idea. And in terms of the way it was done for this rough sketch, and then it was just dropped in the film, I think there is a fairly easy way to cover it. It requires a radical rethinking of how you think about relativity. Namely, the way I think about it is that it doesn't set a speed limit of the speed of light. It tells us that everything in the universe is moving at the speed of causality, which happens to be the speed of light in 4 dimensions. And that obviously would take some explanation, and I'll try to do that during this film, or it might require a separate film. And also there are various other sources that I would recommend you look at for an explanation. Before we go too much further with preliminary talking, I think I'd like to just start the film and see whether I have stuff to say while it's going and how this works. I'm going to allow myself to pause the film if I want to talk more and I feel like it's getting ahead of me. I'm not sure if there will be places where I don't know what to say. So, without any further ado, here's the film. So, here's their title, and there's not too much change. And we're going to start off on a human level
We begin with a scene 1 meter wide, which we view from just 1 meter away. The sleeping man is having
They're
a picnic
showing
on a
that we're
Miami
1
golf
meter
course.
away,
As
and
we
the
back
scene
off,
is
the
1
clocks
meter
start,
wide,
and we accelerate in
and we're
such a
going to
way that
start
after
moving
10
back.
seconds have elapsed, we will be
And
exactly 10 times
every
farther away.
10 seconds, we're going to
Now the
move
scene is 10
10
meters wide,
times
and in 10
further
seconds
away.
it will be 10 times that wide. The
And
sleeping man is
you
still
can
in the
see an
center and will
airplane
remain
coming
there
into
long after
view.
he is lost to
And the
sight.
narration is
After the
basically
second 10
telling
seconds,
you
the square we
what
see
you're
is 100
seeing
meters wide,
going
the
along with
distance a man
some
can run in 10 seconds.
animation at appropriate points. And of course,
Now a
the
kilometer,
production
1,000
film
meters, the distance
had
a racing
higher
car can drive in
production
10 seconds.
values,
Picnic is
although
about
in
lost as
some
we begin to
sense
see Miami Beach.
the
10 to the
rough
fourth power,
sketch that
10,000
we're seeing
meters,
here
the distance a supersonic
has
aeroplane
pretty
can travel
close,
in 10
or
seconds.
I think pretty close production values. I'm going to pause it because I did not cover some things that the narrator covered, and I want to do them and talk about why I'm suggesting powers of 2 instead of powers of 10, and some other things about the proposed film. So, you can see the little dashboard on the left, and I'm sorry, but there's no pointer. I think it'll be clear enough. The number in the box at the top is the power of 10 that we're looking at. And we have the speed expressed underneath it as a more readable version. And then we have 2 clocks. That was a good idea anyway. The traveler's time and Earth time, and that's their attempt to get across some aspects of relativity as they started to approach the speed of light and then greatly exceed it. And of course, there's a question as to what it means when you greatly exceed it, particularly in terms of how time works. And then at the bottom is a percentage of speed of light. I would want to have a percentage of speed of causality that is being devoted to travel through space, and another percentage which shows the amount devoted to travel through time. And those two things would always add up to 100%. And so it would basically be a box with a moving distinction between a color on one side and a color on the other. And we'll talk more about that either in this video or in the notes. And by the way, this is intended to be watchable by people who are just interested in what's being said, and people who would be interested in participating in making the new film. I think so far I have not done a very good job of devoting the narration to one audience or the other, and if push comes to shove, I'm going to devote the narration to people who would work on the film, because people who just want to watch it can watch the original proposed sketch, the one we're using here, or the actual powers of 10, is widely available on YouTube and in various languages as well. So far, we've gotten to seeing that we're by a shore and a lake's going to come into view now. And I guess I'm just going to run the film now.
10 to the 5th power, a 1 and 5 zeros, the distance a satellite in orbit can cover in 10 seconds.
So you can see that they took off from
Our speed
Florida.
is growing at a tremendous rate. In these
In the
past
rough
10 seconds, we
sketch.
will have covered
In the
almost
real
1 million
film,
meters.
I think they took off from Chicago.
The Earth, that will be all but gone in
now
about
the
20
Earth is
seconds,
coming
looks
into
solid
view.
and imposing and remarkably
And
spherical.
it's remarkably
10 to the
spherical,
7th.
as they
Our speed
say.
is now about 2 million.
And I'm going to pause it again. And at this point, I think there could be some narration about why the Earth is a sphere. The fact that gravity has made all the planets and the sun kind of compress into their smallest possible shape. And that as something becomes larger than an asteroid, maybe larger than a small satellite or moon, that tendency becomes really powerful. And that brings up a point about the 10 seconds and powers of 10. I think it's very cute, but I think that it would be a good idea to be more flexible and slow down when you need to explain more, and speed up if you've run out of things to say. I doubt that the narrator would ever really run out of things to say, but there might be stretches when we're getting into empty space, either at the large scales, we're getting into the space between the planets, which are large, and the space between the stars, which are large, and at the small scales, when we're getting into how immense the space inside the atom and between the atoms is. And the word immense there might have been misleading, because obviously we're dealing with the very small. But it is an important point to get across how if you shrink an atom to the point where it's the size of, let's say, a football field, that the nucleus would only be like maybe the size of a marble or a baseball sitting on the 50-yard line. It's an immense distance from that scale of things. So that would be another thing that I'd like to do a better job of actually showing what the real scale is at both the large and the small. And we'll go
miles
ahead.
an hour, 0.3% of the
So
speed
the
of
Earth
light, growing
is
fast. A beam of
shrinking
light on the
there
same
because
plane
we're
as Earth
moving
traveled
away.
this far in 1 second.
And this
We
is
can
a
now
really
see the
good
orbital path
point
of the moon around the Earth.
where that little beam of light went by, and the narration explains that it was at the true speed of light. In other words, we saw it moving as we would if this scene was really taking place. It went by really quick, and I think most people don't really have enough time to absorb what that meant. After you've watched it a number of times, or if you really understand it well ahead of time, you might catch it. And one good thing that we're seeing here that I think would be maintained in any other version, but might take a bit more explanation is that we're seeing the orbit. What we're seeing now is the orbit of the moon around the Earth, but we actually draw the lines so that you can see something, because if you didn't, and maybe we should show that, you wouldn't really see the object at all. It would be very small. Kind of like when you look at ships from a satellite or a high-flying plane, it's very hard to spot a ship unless it's leaving a wake, and then you see the wake. And similarly for airplanes, they can be hard to spot unless they're leaving behind a contrail. So that might be something that could be explained.
As our speed gets to be...
Let's continue moving on out. And I didn't talk about why powers of 2 instead of 10 very much. I'm not sure. Oh, I'm sorry. We're not moving. So let's. I'm just going to talk about the powers of 2 versus 10 before resuming. I think it would be good if we can, instead of making this about powers of 10, which is a worthwhile goal, and I'm not sure at all about this, but doubling really gets the same effect of becoming extremely large extremely quickly. That's why Moore's law is so profound in terms of progress. And there are many other examples of doubling, including the really classic example of the story of the inventor of chess who asked for 1 grain of rice on for the first square, double it on the second, and so on for the 64 squares, and how much rice would be involved. So in a sense, that's what we're trying to get across. And I thought that powers of 2 might be nice as an alternative to powers of 10, to some extent just to make it different. But I'm not sure that that's enough reason, and I would listen to arguments about keeping it powers of 10.
A substantial percentage of the
let's
speed of light,
continue
it has
moving
an
away,
effect on our time scale. What
and
seems a
we're
normal
going to
10
start
seconds
to
to us would be
see
a much longer
the
period in
paths
relative
of the
Earth time.
planets
Our clocks are
traced
getting
out.
out of synchronization.
And once again, we're
Now a long
showing
time
them in
elapses on
order
Earth
to
for
make
each 10
them
seconds of our
visible,
traveling time. The
and
clock
we
is spinning round.
see
The
the
light from
sun
the sun
coming
appears,
to the picture.
parts of the orbit paths of some of
And
the
that's
planets,
pretty good.
Mercury, Venus,
I
Earth, and
wonder
Mars.
if we should
Then
start
to the 12th.
much closer to the sun. I saw a very interesting film that was like a zoom out from the sun, and it was done sort of in real time rather than the exponential or multiplicative doubling. And it was interesting. I think it was done essentially at light speed. So the film actually took 8 minutes to get to the Earth. They might have taken some license with where each of the planets were in order to do a continuous out at light speed. And I think they maybe took 2 hours to get to Pluto or something like that. So I definitely wouldn't want to take that approach. But I do think we should reconsider the starting point, although starting out at human scale on the Earth had some real benefits to it as well. So let's keep
Considerably
going
farther
here.
away is the outer group of
And
planets, so that we now see our whole
We
solar
say
system.
something about the outer planets swinging wide in their big orbits.
Because they are so
I
much
do
farther
think
away from us than the
that
sun,
if we gave ourselves more time, it would be interesting to talk about the additional knowledge that we have since this rough sketch was made and since the production film was made, which I believe was 1977, but I'm not at all sure of that. It could have been in the 60s, and I apologize for not being better prepared. But when I got this working, I wanted to make this, which I've thought about for a long time. Let's see. I'll just let it continue here.
Stars seem to stand still. The entire solar
And
system can now only be identified as light from the sun. The ancient constellations demonstrate the
zooming
direction in
out.
which we are traveling,
We start
perpendicular
to
to the
talk
plane of the
about
Milky
the
Way
stars
galaxy.
on the other side, and
A
that
supernova,
the
an
other
exploding
side of the
star,
Earth, which
flares.
has been lost to view. And I think that
We are now
was
1 light year away,
um,
10 to the 16th meters.
the
We are
closest
approaching the distance of the
star,
closest
probably,
star to the sun,
and
Alpha
we're
Centauri.
talking about
Now our
the
speed
different
is so great
stars.
that even the stars in the
And
background
everything
slowly
here
seem to change their
works pretty
position,
well.
converging to the center.
The
Closest stars form a local group which gives
other
another
aspect
dimension to the sky.
of the
10 to
film
the 18th.
that
As we
would be
back into the
different
nebulous
now,
material of the Milky Way, we lose all
and I'm
familiarity
talking
with our
about
surroundings.
after we get
Gases and
past
small stars of different kinds
our
surround us.
galaxy, which we're seeing, and we're going to shortly see
Now we are
other
beginning to see the
galaxies,
tremendous
and of
cosmic
course,
form of the Milky Way galaxy,
we're now
of which the Earth is such a tiny and
traveling
insignificant part.
many, many
All stars we
times
see from Earth
faster
belong to
than
this one
light.
galaxy,
And you'll
which
notice
in
that
turn
the
belongs to its
percentage
local
of light
group of
speed at the
galaxies.
bottom
These form part of a grouping
still
system,
says
much as the stars do.
99.99%.
They are so many and so varied that from this distance they
I'm
appear
worried that
like
they're
the
getting
stars from Earth,
ahead of us,
although of
although I'm
course
not
each
really
spot
sure.
of light now
I think a proper explanation of relativity with proper dashboard controls could take into account and actually show how much faster than light we're going. In other words, a greater than 100% reading, along with showing what would happen to time. And there are some limitations, but we could do a much more accurate dashboard, essentially. And I also think that there are various things we've discovered over the 30 or 50 years that the film has been out about the stars and the galaxies along the way that would be very much in keeping with the spirit to talk about. But the next big change would be when they reach the end. So I'm going to go ahead and
now
let the
contains
film
many millions
run.
of stars.
And I think we haven't gotten
Were we to continue our journey, the scene would probably
galaxies
now
yet.
remain
I'm
much
not
the
sure
same.
what the
Spots of
actual
light might just get smaller.
largest figure is, but we could talk about the structures of the
The
galaxies
trip back to the picnic on the
that
golf course will be a
have been
sped up reverse
found.
version, reducing the distance to
great-
the Earth's
oh,
surface by
I'm
one
going to pause it
magnitude
as
every
we
2.
head back. So they got to 10 to the 24th, I think. And I'm sure we could go a few more doublings from there and have more things to say about the large-scale structure of the universe, about which very, very little was known at the time that this was made. And also we might have a little something to say about black holes. Perhaps we use the image that we've now made of a black hole. Since I can't think of what else, I'll just let the faster zoom back to the scene
2
at
seconds.
the
Every 2 seconds we will appear to cover 90% of the distance back to Earth. We notice the rhythm of change between periods of great activity and relative inactivity that will continue all the way down to our next target, the nucleus of a carbon atom just beneath the skin on the hand of the sleeping man at the picnic.
Rhythm of change and how it changes from a lot of changes
Enter the
to
9th
less,
meters.
and that it's
Enter
going
the
to
8th,
continue as we
7,
get
6,
to the man.
5,
And we're now going to go
4,
ahead and zoom
3,
towards his hand
2,
and
1.
visit the atomic
We are back at our
and
starting
subatomic
point.
and
Now
also
slow up on 10
microscopic before
centimeters.
we get to
Enter the
those
minus 1
realms.
meters.
So
Again, in
you
each
can
10
see
seconds we will
zooming in
cover
on
1
his hand
magnitude of
now.
change.
And I think this part
Enter the minus 2
would
meters,
largely
1
stay the
centimeter,
same.
coming in on
We're
1
going to head
millimeter.
towards the
The
capillary
surface of the
and we're
skin
going to
looks
talk
rough and
about it.
furrowed. The outside
And
layer contains dead cells which we constantly shed and replace from
Very
within.
shortly, I think we're going to be looking at one
Within the skin, the dark
cell.
area we see is a tiny blood vessel, a capillary. The blood it carries is made up of different types of single cells.
I think that's the lymphocyte there.
This
And
cell
we're
is a
heading
leukocyte.
towards the
It
nucleus.
is self-reproducing
I'm
and
gonna
one of those which
pause it
contains in its nucleus all the genetic material.
when we
the
get to the
23
chromosomes and talk about how obviously this picture and the next one upcoming, which it would be the DNA, of course, how there would be a lot more to talk about in terms of knowledge. At the time this was made, they had just discovered the structure of DNA. They knew it was a double helix, but hadn't gotten much further. So we could talk about the possibility of editing it, the possible horrors that would be involved. I don't know what age level this would be geared towards. My thinking has been an intelligent 12-year-old, but that's another thing that would be very open to discussion. And this is another part where animation would get very interesting.
Pairs of chromosomes that
I'll let
humans
it
carry.
continue now.
The scene is now 1 micron wide, 1/1,000,000th of a meter. Chromosomes appear to be made up of donut-shaped parts strung together.
Animation
Within the chromosomes we
for
find the
what
genes.
the
Each gene contains endless spirals of
DNA
stringy material,
looks like.
deoxyribonucleic acid,
And
DNA.
even with
The
motion
DNA
and
structure
things
contains all the
to
hereditary
show
information.
what a ribosome
At
looks
this
like
scale, we
as
build
it's
models
chewing
to
on the
represent the
DNA
form of
and,
the atom,
and replicating
from information about the
There's
components,
a lot
their size,
of
and
good
movement.
stock footage
This is a
available
single carbon
because
atom.
all of that
Carbon
research
atoms are present in
is
every
public.
living thing.
And
The
now
outer shell is defined by
I
the
think
orbital
this is
path of
supposed
4
to be an
spinning
atom,
electrons,
which is
1
a reasonably
angstrom.
good
Passing through this shell,
representation,
we see an
although
inner shell,
I would
2
tend towards
electrons orbiting to
waves
prescribe a
rather
sphere.
than
Within
quickly
the second
rushing
electron layer, we
particles
find what
to
seems
show
like a vast
quantum
nothing. In each 10
effects.
seconds, we still cover 90%
That
of the
would be
remaining
interesting.
distance to the center.
And now we're inside the atom,
Finally, it
and we're
begins to
heading
appear,
towards the nucleus.
that unimaginably dense
You can
nucleus
see
of a
it
carbon
showing up
atom,
in the
12
distance
orbiting
there.
parts, 6
And
protons,
that's
and 6
about
neutrons.
where
Our
they're
galaxy is
going
36
to
powers
stop,
of 10 larger than the nucleus of a
because
carbon
that was
atom.
all that was
The
known
diameter
at
of the
the
atomic
time.
nucleus were a unit 1,
They
then the
knew
diameter of the
about the
galaxy in atomic
protons and
units would be
neutrons,
10 to the 35th,
and I
or
think
1 and 36
they
zeros.
might have said something about quarks, and I'll let the credits run while I talk. Obviously, there's a few more powers, and I think I'll go ahead and let it run while I'm talking, but I'll try not to get distracted by it too much. Once they reach what was the limits of present-day knowledge, which I think is how they put it for
We begin with
either
a
the
scene
rough
1 meter
sketch
wide,
or
which we view
the
from just 1
production
meter
version.
away. The
I think I'm
sleeping
going
man
to
is having a
pause
picnic
this
on a Miami golf course.
just because it's too distracting for me while I'm trying to talk. We can obviously go a lot deeper now than they could for the rough sketch, and even deeper than they did in the production version, which was about 10 years later, so they knew more. The production version says something about maybe these are quarks in quantum motion or something to that effect. And I think that's where it leaves off. We can really say with a great deal more assurance now that these are quarks, and we can even show the quarks, the different kinds of quarks, and we could probably work in some reference to general semantics at that point, as well as at other points where it would be highly appropriate, because the names of the objects and our representations for them are really made up at that point. And the same for protons and neutrons. They don't really look like the things we're showing, and we could talk more about that and about how general semantics takes the mystery and the quandary and paradoxes, or at least some of them, out of quantum mechanics and even general relativity. But anyway, to get on with the point about going further into the realm of the small, the atomic and subatomic and so on, we can certainly show quarks, what we know about them in terms of the top and bottom and up and down and charmed quark and things like that. And we can even say something about string theory or quantum gravity at the end as reaching the limits of present-day knowledge. So that would be both an obvious extension of powers of 10 and also a really good jumping off point to talk about general semantics a little bit and say something about the next video or film or whatever it is that we're doing. Could be a book, could be a matching book and video and whatever form of new media you find interesting, like augmented reality or virtual reality, seem like very clear things to do a powers of 10 or a powers of 2 type production. And I kind of wonder, I haven't made any attempt to see whether anybody's done that. There are many other takeoffs on powers of 10. There's one that was done for Cosmos. The second version, the one that I believe Morgan Freeman narrated, that kind of uses a circle instead of a square for the moving out, and which I found good in some ways and definitely not as well done as Charles and Ray Eames' rough sketch or production version in some ways. And of course, The Simpsons have done a version, and there are just too many for me to try and list them here. A version in virtual reality would seem nice, but of course it wouldn't get the mass distribution that I think we are looking for from a video or something that you can put on YouTube or Instagram or whatever. Let's see, what else can I say about the proposed film, or that I should say at the end of this? Thank you for watching, if you've gotten this far. I believe that one or both of the rough sketch and there was a hyphen between that or the production film that I've been referring to. So either the rough sketch or Powers of 10 are not under copyright protection now. I'm more sure about the rough sketch than I am about the Powers of 10, and I wouldn't say that I'm 100% sure of either one of them, but I think so in terms of what degree of maintaining the copyright, or what things would have had to be done to maintain the copyright over the last 50 or 70 years. And beyond that, I don't think it matters in terms of producing a new film, because the ideas can certainly not be copyrighted. That's kind of by the definition of copyright. It's the expression of an idea. So I feel confident about that. And I also feel confident that non-profit usage of the rough sketch or the Powers of 10 film would be allowable. And kind of my last ditch thing would be, if we wanted to use portions of the actual sketch or film, is that I would be really surprised if the owners, if there are owners still alive, either the descendants of Charles and Ray Eames or IBM, or whoever you would find by researching the copyright in a really legal, professional manner, would object to a new film that updated it being distributed once again. And having said that, this is copyright by Leonard Fisher, 2023, but is licensed under a Creative Commons with attribution license. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you wish to. Click the notification icon if you'd like to know when I'm doing a live stream. And with that, I bid you a pleasant good night.